Thank you, folks. Thank you, RFP, for hosting this event and having us. Really appreciate the opportunity just to share a high-level overview of a lot of this valuable information on facility management. We find that a lot of organizations really struggle as to where do we start, where do we go, how do we get things up and running, we struggle with the way that we've been operating in the past, how do we get to today's day and age and bring everything up to speed. Again, whether it's on paper, whether it's a tool, that's irrelevant. It's understanding that process and putting it into place. That's the key objective. We'll go through these. We'll share some really cool examples. Again, as mentioned, if you folks have questions, comments, feel free to write in the chat. I'll try my best to monitor it. If the folks at RFP can help with that as well, would be great appreciated. Or just feel free to unmute and just stop me. No problems at all. I want to get those questions fresh, as opposed to leaving them all to the end and just kind of neglecting those there. What we're going through today is really 45 minutes to an hour in length. This is a part of a 10 to 15 hour course that we run. So we're going to do a really high level condensed version of it. If you're interested in learning more, feel free to contact me directly. I think my information's in the last slide, and we can follow up on ways just to further that education and further that dialogue. So again, thank you very much, and we'll get a little bit into it. So first slide, what is asset management? There's a lot of different ways that people try to explain it. At a very high level, facility management is asset management, tracking your operations, your maintenance, your human resources, and your infrastructure. All of those tie together to what proper asset management is. The proper definition is a high-level strategy that defines an organized approach to planning, maintaining, operating physical assets cost effectively over their life cycle while optimizing the future benefits to stakeholders. So as you can see here, asset management starts long before a piece of equipment's maintained. It's actually in that planning stage of purchasing it, making sure we're picking something that's energy efficient, that'll work for our building, that we can afford to maintain, that we can get parts for cost effectively. We've been to some organizations where they spend $10,000 on 2 or 3 sets of blinds for their windows. But then those dollars cannot be allocated to something that may be more high risk. So having all of these key areas identified and what's the end goal? Optimizing the future benefits to stakeholders, patrons, the community, counselors, not just the benefits, but also the risk and the safety as well. If we take away nothing from this presentation, if you say, hey, there's a lot of stuff we went through, what's the one thing that I really need to understand and grasp? It's this slide here. That's why we put it right at the beginning. The 3 components of asset management. So if anybody asks you, hey, we've got a question, we want to cut funding, or we want to increase the level of service, or we want to decrease the risk, these are the 3 things we need to be aware of. So again, investment, level of service, which is the work, the maintenance, or the commitment we're going to provide to the community, and the risk level. So how do all 3 of these tie together? So first off, again, you can only have one. So if council says, or if the board says, we want to decrease risk, something happened, there was an issue, we don't want to have equipment that's 35 years old, we need to lower that risk level. Well, what's that impact going to be? It'll increase funding, and it'll increase that level of service. So we'll need to hire more staff, or get more contractors in the building, maintain something as opposed to once a month, maybe once a week. Or the flip side, council or the board might say, you know what, we're going to decrease investments. You had a budget of $500,000 or $1 million, whatever it is, we're going to remove 10%, 25%, 50%. You say, hey, that's your call. That's completely fine. But what's the impact? The risk will go up, and that level of service in the short term will go down. You're going to fire or lay off 2 or 3 staff members. We can't provide that same level of care and maintenance we used to. Those pieces of equipment will now be offered up to a higher level of risk or exposure because we've cut down that dollar value. And that's the information we share with those counselors or with those board members. And at the end of the day, they're the owners they're the owners of those facilities, and it's up to them as to how they want to run it. We just share that information. And again, if there's any questions, feel free to stop me. All of this is great, but where do we start? Some people have PM plans, some do budgeting in spreadsheets, some do, we want to do analytics and we want to have KPIs and all sorts of fun and awesome things. None of that can be accurately done or really done with any value if you don't have a proper inventory of your facility. So what do we mean by an inventory? Collecting and structuring all of your building information. So how does that work? Here's the key information you would like to collect on all of your capital pieces of equipment. So anything over $2,000, $5,000, or $10,000, whatever you deem as that capital dollar value, going out and collecting it. We do it for a number of organizations, and for us, for like a 2-pad ice rink, really, if you have someone that's dedicated to do it and understands the structure, it can be done in a matter of days to collect and structure it all, whether it's in a spreadsheet or in an existing tool that you have. So what does that mean? Uniformat 2, this is something you can look up. It's a building code and building structures for collecting building information. So as you can see here, it's a 4-level hierarchy: services, HVAC, heat generating system, and then a rooftop unit. So it allows you to drill down right to that specific piece of equipment with associated building codes. Then you're going to want to collect supplier data. So we know, okay, this is RTU3, RTU4. It's a carrier model. It's carrier, this is the model, this is the serial number. The value of that is, let's say you're going to do a renovation project, or you're going to replace some of your rooftop units. You can then evaluate and say, okay, we've had carriers in the past. How have they performed? Should we purchase something else? Or are we going to stick with carrier because we had an awesome experience with the customer service, the maintenance, the lifespan, and so on? If you don't have that data, you're really handcuffing yourself when it comes to those future decisions. Location. So obviously we're going to want to know, hey, this piece of equipment is on the roof, but we're also going to want to know what area it services. So rink 1, rink 3, rink 5. I think we have someone in the waiting room as well. So the value of this, we've been down and visited a few larger rinks. So the San Jose Sharks practice facility and the Anaheim Ducks practice facility about last month, they had a 6-pad facility. It's massive. For them, you can't just say your exhaust fan is on the roof because their roof is huge. So we went and we broke their facility into quadrants, and we would say, here's rink 1, rink 2, rink 3, all the way to rink 6. And we took a file or a PDF of the floor plan of the facility of all 3 floors, and we physically mapped out what those quadrants consist of, so that we knew every piece of equipment in that quadrant would be a part of that section of the building. So that then it would make it so much easier for them to quantify and validate where those pieces of equipment are, and obviously where they serviced. And now they have 200-300 pieces of equipment properly structured and easy to identify. Financial costs. What was the purchase price? What is the annual energy cost? What is the annual maintenance cost? And what's a projected replacement cost? So obviously having value and what is that tangible capital asset value, or what was the purchase price? Annual energy, if you have that, because that's something key. You might say, hey, we saved $5,000 on this piece of equipment, but the annual maintenance might be high because you need to order parts from Europe or from Asia, and there's a long wait time. And maybe it's not as energy efficient. So are you really saving that much? And then planning that replacement cost, knowing what model you're looking for. Do we want a frictionless compressor? What's the cost? What's the benefit? What's the value? And that'll help you with the budgeting. A lot of rinks are doing the LED light projects in the arena. So determining what's the cost, can we get grants, can we get funding, what's available. I think we have another individual in the waiting room. Life cycle is the last major component. So tracking the risk, we'll delve into that a little bit more, but at a high level, is it very high, medium, low, very low risk? And we'll get into what quantifies that. When it was installed, when the warranty is expired, the useful date. So when do we anticipate it needs to be replaced? And then the actual replacement date. So as you can see here, we expect it's going to have about a 23-year lifespan, but it actually lasts an extra 5 years. So either the piece of equipment is a quality tool, or we're doing the proper PMs, or a variety of reasons that extended that lifespan. Maybe if it didn't last as long, you might say we're going to look at going with a different vendor next time. And this helps with that evaluation. we've had some cool stories working with some other NHL teams. So the Vegas Golden Knights a few years ago, when they started collecting inventory on their facility, all of their faucets broke at the same time. We used the same story over and over again. So they had to go out and collect all of that data, put it in a spreadsheet, send it to the vendor for them to say, yeah, it's no longer under warranty. If they would have had it structured, clean, and organized, they just could have export, email it off, and as opposed to spend 2 or 3 weeks trying to do it from scratch. So ideally, when these pieces of equipment are coming into the building, that's when you'd want to categorize it. I know a lot of us have existing inventory or legacy buildings, which isn't possible to start from scratch with new installs. But ideally, if something's replaced, collect that data and collect as much as you can right from the beginning. So here's that idea of where do you start? Capital assets, definition of it might not be expensive, but could it impact the operation if it fails? Do you need to budget for it? Or is there a long lead time? So a year, 2 years, it's not something simple as just going to Home Depot and getting a new door handle. Some valuable information, documents, manuals, also taking pictures year over year to see the degradation, just having as much valuable information structured and associated. Again, whether it's in a spreadsheet, whether it's in an internal file you have on your computer, or if you use a tool, that's the methods that should be used. Any questions so far? Okay. Level of service. So what's level of service? Level of service, there's 2 key areas to it. So you have your customer and your operational or technical. Customer level of service is the commitment you make to the public. So, hey, we're going to have X amount of hours available for public skate or for open swim. We'll make the costs manageable or affordable to the public with minimal increases in fees. Operational is, okay, internally, what do we need to do to match that activity? So to do that, we need to make sure that our plan is always up and running, our dressing rooms are clean, and we provide schedules so that we can have a 2-hour block every day or once a week for that public usage, and that we are cost effectively maintaining our facility so we don't need to have drastic increases to costs or charges. And then that ties into just that final activity of completing that physical work. So there's 2 sides. It's not just the level of service internally of the work, but also that commitment to the community. Preventive maintenance. So what does it mean? So there's 3. Corrective maintenance is technically like those work orders that you do. So it's something's broken, we got to go out and fix it. That's the last resort. Preventive maintenance is the developing of checklists, going to resources like RFP, ORFA, and different organizations or even vendors like Zamboni and Olympia and Athletica, and finding and using their checklists that they have available. And then the future, which, one day, who knows, is the predictive maintenance. So having sensors on your devices and telling you based on your runtime hours and based on usage that these pieces of equipment are coming due, or the belt is starting to fail and needs to be replaced. That's the future. But these are those 3 steps of preventative maintenance. And hopefully most of us are around this area number 2. Having practical conversations with organizations, they say, well, you know what, that's great in theory and all, but we don't really have the time to do absolutely every single checklist. How do we prioritize, or how do we figure out what's that highest priority? Well, first off, you want to go by regulations. What's mandatory? Water testing, health inspections, plant logs, ice depth checks, all of those items. Once that's completed and you know that you've got it taken care of, maybe joint health and safety inspections, then you go down and you say, what has the highest risk? So for a pool, for a rink, that mechanical room. Maybe for a park, the playgrounds, or maybe aging infrastructure that could cause a high risk if someone was to get injured. And then last is the usage. So it depends on your operations, but most likely if the ice rink if it's January and February and everyone's in the ice rink, you're going to want to make sure that that is operational. Yes, in the off season, it's nice to get more bigger jobs done, but if you're leaving something that could cause the rink to shut down for a matter of weeks, you want to make sure you're on top of that and not leaving it till you take your ice out. Same with the pool in the summer, or turf fields in the summer as well, making sure that whatever assets are being used are being properly maintained. Now it comes to the pieces of equipment. So of that equipment, how do we determine what's the priority within a rink, within a pool? We start with the main usage. So as Jedi likes to say in these other organizations is the primary thing you're selling is your ice. So what is the key assets that are will impact your ice performance? Well, the ice itself. Regularly doing your ice step checks, your floods, your shaves, your edging, then doing checks on your ice resurfacers, your edgers, your plant, cooling towers, whatever that work is, whether internal or sent out to your contractors like Simcoe, making sure that's always kept up to date so your facility is open and available. Then once those are done, complete those supporting pieces of equipment. So the rubber mats, bleacher seating, doors. Are you going to start first thing with bleachers and doors and rubber mats? Well, no, because if you spend all day doing that, the higher importance assets get left behind. So making sure that there's a priority level set in place as to what needs to get done and that the staff are on top of that. Any questions so far on what I said? I hope I haven't lost anybody so far, or is this all pretty straightforward to get started? Okay. Risk management. So two components of risk. I know I spoke about it before. What is risk? High, medium, low. So you've got two areas, consequence of failure and your probability of failure. So the consequence is the likelihood. What's the actual chance of this happening? That's probability. Consequence is the impact. So if something were to fail, how bad would it be? If a door breaks, what serious impact is it? If it's a brand new door, what's the chance of that door actually breaking? Some of you might be able to visualize, hey, okay, thinking of our facility or thinking of our parks, where does some of my equipment actually lie on this chart? And it might be different equipment for some of you. Some of you might have a brand new ice resurfacer, so that might be very low risk. Some of you might have one that's 30 years old, and it could be high risk. It's not the same for everybody or for every facility. Now, taking it one step further, there's 5 key categories of risk. You have your health and safety, your operational, your environmental, financial, and legal. So health and safety is the health and safety of people in the building. If there's some sort of chemical leak, operational is if this is down, how does it affect our facility's ability to function and to be open? Environmental, what's the impact on the environment? So this is more for individuals, this is for the environment. Financial, so it's not just what's the cost to replace it, do we budget, but also that loss of revenue if our facility is closed. And then the most scariest of all of them is legal and regulatory. If something were to happen, will it create lawsuits? So each of these areas should be defined internally as to, okay, what is a 1 versus a 10? 10 being the worst, 1 being minimal, and what does that actually mean if I have a 7 for financial condition or a 3 for environmental? So if you're taking to council and say, hey, this is high, medium, low risk, you can show them and define across all of your buildings or all of your assets what that entails. So as you can see here, health and safety at an 8, 5 to 10 people could die, 100 injuries, serious long-term effects. I know it's very morbid, but just to drive home that point. And different size organizations will tinker with this based on the effect that it can have on stakeholders. Asset risk weighting, I'm not going to get into this a lot, but just evenly distributing these when it comes to scoring it will give you a specific score. If you tailor it to say, hey, certain risk areas are of higher priority for us, like legal or financial, that'll tailor the score more for prioritizing those assets. This slide here is probably, so I told you of the most important slide. This one here is probably the coolest one. So we did a presentation in BC last year. A gentleman there said, hey, I've taken 15 years of asset management courses. I'm just going to sit in the back here because I've heard all this stuff. So I'm just looking forward just to getting a little bit of a refresher, but I probably won't learn anything new. We said, okay, that's completely fine. We pulled up this slide here and he says, can you send me a screenshot? And I've never seen this before. So we'll take this a little slow, but this is how you can track overall risk levels. Now, Is this expected that you're supposed to have a tool or have in your spreadsheets all these crazy formulas? No, this is even just a way of visualizing your building as a whole, your asset, or even individual pieces of equipment, or the risk of your department. If you use this in a council meeting to visualize where you're at, where you want to be, that's phenomenal. So we'll get started, and we'll use the example comparing it to a car, let's say. Inherent risk, that's this purple bar here. Unavoidable, built-in, fundamental. So you can have a car, you can change the oil, you can change these the tires, you can make sure that you get alignments all the time, you can do absolutely everything. No matter what you do, there's still a risk associated to it. You could get a flat tire, another car can hit into you, you can get into a crash, a variety of different reasons of things that you just can't control. That's your inherent risk. So as you can see here. So it's the same thing with a plant, with a ice resurfacer, with just a facility as a whole. There'll never really be a level 0 of inherent risk. Target risk, this is that goal from that very first slide we spoke of. What's the level of risk that you are willing to accept, or that you're willing to accept? So that is this one right here. So it's obviously above the inherent risk. You can't, none of these metrics here can go below the inherent risk level. So based on discussions with council and budgets and numbers and staffing that we have, this is the amount of risk that we're willing to accept. Unmitigated risk is if you do absolutely nothing. So let's say it's a car and you don't change the tires. Let's say you get a crack on shield, you don't change it. You don't get oil changes. You put the wrong type of gasoline in the car, whatever it is, driving it off a cliff. What's the worst it could be? For different pieces of equipment, it's more severe. If you leave a door forever, okay, what's the worst that can happen? If you abandon your ice plant, well, it gets to be pretty serious. Current risk, where are we right now? I've got a car that's 7 years old. Where am I? Now, this is where council has a play in this. So you say, okay, projected 1 year, 5 year, 10 years, you can decide risk level with no funding. So based on where we are right now, if we don't receive any funding or the dollars that we need to do a rebuild on this compressor, this risk level will go from here to here. So let's say from 7.5 to 8.5. But if we get that $50,000, $70,000 to that rebuild, it's going to go from a 7.5 to a 6.5, closer to this target. So now is a bit of an overview of this. Your optimal risk range is anything above your inherent risk because you can't go below that, all the way to your target risk. Your current asset need is from where you are right now to where you want to be, pretty straightforward. And risk mitigation is preventing your asset from falling so far to the unmitigated risk level and getting closer to that target level. Have I lost anyone? Does this make sense? Does this seem like a valuable way of visualizing risk in your organization? Either thumbs up, comment in the chat so I know we're all still here, we're all still good, and we haven't lost anybody. Awesome. Perfect. Mike Tajiri, do you want to share your thoughts on this? Does this make sense? Does this seem valuable?
Hey, Zach. Yeah, I think it could definitely be valuable. It's just something, another way to track and another way to benefit yourself if you need to follow some type of life cycle. And that's why I'm actually registered in this, is to look at different options for my life cycle for my arenas.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing, Mike. Appreciate it. Okay. And bang on, it's some tools that you'll see here, some of these methods, some will be, hey, I want to start looking into this right now and I need to implement or use this. Others you might say, that's good, that's interesting, but I'm just not there yet. But this is the roadmap as to where we need to be over the next 6 months, a year, 3 years, based on your timelines. So this is a quick example of comparing two pieces of equipment, rink bleachers versus an ice resurfacer. Higher unmitigated risk, higher value of investment, less value of investment, target risk at different levels, inherent risk at different levels. This can be used for equipment, buildings, assets, departments, however you wish to implement these sort of objectives. Budget prioritization, again, at a high level, you've got a number of pieces of equipment. If you don't have an inventory, you can't really evaluate it properly. If you don't know the replacement cost, if you haven't gotten a quote from suppliers or vendors, if you haven't done a risk assessment, if you haven't gotten a building condition assessment, if you don't have an idea as to when it needs to be replaced, as opposed to just saying, yeah, this has a 13, 14-year lifespan, well, what's that year? Because then you can run easier reports based on year, as opposed to just 13 years, 12 years, 10 years. So obviously, the more funds you have, this orange line will go further down. The less funds you have, the less piece of equipment you can replace. It's not always the most expensive ones that need to be replaced when you're comparing 3 or 4 objectives, and that's that risk weighting. And this will help to manage it and to structure it for you. I was going to say a comment, but I completely forgot. But this is the idea of managing all of your risks. And the less that you manage, that's the higher the risk. So if we're pushing these ones off for another year, 2, 3 years, that's increasing your risk level, lowering your level of service, and lowering your investment. I think we got another person in the waiting room. Optimized asset replacement. So this is these total cost curves. And again, we're not going to go too in depth, but this here is the depreciation of the piece of equipment. This here is the aggregate repairs and maintenance. And this is your total cost curve. So as you can see here, year over year, again, let's say it's a car, 100 grand, that's a pretty expensive car. It's depreciating year over year, and the maintenance is slowly adding up. So maybe when you're doing an oil change, next year you're changing the tires, again, windshield replacement, various other items, changing the brakes. That's the value of collecting and storing those invoices and aggregating it against the piece of equipment to say, this piece of equipment we're depreciating over, this says 50 years, but maybe 10, 20, 25 years. At what point is our repairs and maintenance eclipse the value of that piece of equipment? Again, this is ideal. Maybe we don't have the funds to replace everything once it starts to cost more than what it's worth. But the problem is slowly that piece of equipment starts to cost a whole lot more than it should, and it's not operating as efficiently. It's not as energy efficient. Those are all things that need to be aware of. Whether the council agrees to do it, that's their call, that's their decision. But at least, again, you've provided the visualization, the tools to show, look, this is how, this is where we're at with this equipment. So then you say, it's your call if you want to replace it or not. Ideally, obviously, at the lowest point is when you want to replace it. And ahead of then is when you would want to purchase the replacement. So a year, year and a half, checking with your vendors, hey, what's the lead time on a new ice resurfacer or on a new cooling tower? Get that information, purchase it, so that then when the time comes, you can replace it and have that more energy efficient option, or that tool that, again, you start all over again with minimal maintenance, minimal support from staff. But again, it's just about visualizing where things are at, either as a piece of equipment or as the building as a whole. The next step. So everything I've shown you up till now is what we should be doing or working on or getting to some degree. Moving forward, there is metrics to help with identifying where do our facilities actually rank. So facility condition index. If you've been in council meetings, you've heard other departments like roads, public works talk about PCI, pavement condition index. This is similar, but it's meant for facilities. So I'll give you a quick overview as to how it works. First off, you validate the inventory. You need to know what you have. You figure out the cost to build your facility brand new. So let's take a 2-pad facility. To purchase it back in the day, or sorry, to build it back in the day, it might have been $5 million. Let's say if we want to build it brand new, it might be 25 million, just as an example. If we want to, then we need to identify the deficiencies in the building that need to be fixed. So, hey, we've got, just off the top of my head, we've got $500,000 that should be replaced. Ideally, if we had the funds, obviously, yeah, we'd love to redo the whole building, but what's critical stuff that needs to be replaced? You add all of those together, you divide it by the value of the building, and it gives you a percentage score. So pavement condition index is the opposite. 98% means, hey, you're in fantastic condition. Whereas FCI the lower percentage is better, which means that a smaller fraction or a smaller portion of the building needs to be replaced. So you want to keep that number as small as possible. And we were just down at Anaheim. They have a brand new building built in 2019. So we've put all their data, structured and organized it, ran the report, and it said, we ran their FCI score. It showed nothing. I said, oh no, is it broken? And we realized they had nothing to replace this year because it was brand new. I know it's a nice problem to have. Some other buildings we deal with, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40% replacement. But it helps them visualize what's going on in that facility. Here's all those items. There's the score, 6%. It's at a fair condition. I can compare a building in Athabasca to a facility in Innisfail to a facility in Banff by using this FCI score. It doesn't matter if it's a 1 pad, 3 pad, if it's a pool, if it's a park, this method can be used to help evaluate all of that. I'm just going to take it one step further, but again, not going to dwell too much on or get too in depth. The EFCI builds on top of that standard score that you have, but it just gives you a 5-year forecast. So it's everything from the past, including what are we going to need to do over the next 5 years. You add those together, divide it by the value. That gives you a percentage of 14%. You can see these scores here change with that 5-year plan because you have more time. You're hopefully able to raise more funds or get more work done in that longer period of time. And this is a standard, so it's not something we've come up with. This is what, like if you go on, we're from Toronto, so the TDSB website, they've got all their schools, and I can look at the high school I went to, pull it up, and I can see their FCI score and all of the projects that need to be done for the entire school board and how those scores rank. So this is a tool that can be used internally as well, or shared with the public through some of your master plans. This is a visualization of it then. You got 100% of the pie, that's the value of the building. 6% needs to be replaced by the end of this year, 8% over the next 5 years. That's 14%, which means 86% is going to be intact. You're good, you're golden. Just keep it as it is. Then we've got something on the complete opposite side of the spectrum. 12% needs to be replaced by the end of the year, 46% over the next 5 years. Only 42% of the building is going to be intact. Do we make those changes? Do we decommission the building? Do we repurpose it? Again, that's not our decision, but we provide the data and the tools and the analytics for those individuals to see and evaluate what's going on. And you say, hey, at the end of the day, I showed it to you. It's your call. So this is the value of it. Whether you've got Saddle Dome Arena or Rogers Arena, Rogers Place, that's worth hundreds of millions of dollars, or you've got a single pad facility worth 5 million. This helps to normalize it across all those facilities. So originally, if you present to council, they would just see these numbers: 5.8 million, under a million, under $500,000. Their original reaction will be, well, what's wrong with the arena? Why are we spending $6 million there? But what's not taken into consideration is the value of those buildings. So if you look here, the arena's obviously got some pretty complex mechanical infrastructure. Town hall, yeah, sure it does, but not to the same degree as an arena. And a fire station will have those fire trucks and other key assets. You run the FCI score, and what might seem like a lot of money here is really only 9% of that asset value. Town hall, which might look, oh, okay, it's reasonable compared to the arena, is actually 30% of that value. And the fire hall looks reasonable, and it is reasonable in comparison to the value of the building, 4%. And this will help with that presentation. I know this was pretty deep and pretty detailed. Have I lost anybody? Does this make sense? Does this seem as just, a concept that'll help with understanding how our inventory, inspections, work orders, and budgeting kind of all comes together in evaluating our facilities? And again, if you guys don't mind sharing maybe a thumbs up or something in the comments, just to know that we're all good and I haven't lost anybody. Awesome. Thank you. Phenomenal. There's a whole lot of cool reports. Again, I don't want to get too in depth, but there's some more stuff as to what's the priority of the building. Just because it's in poor condition, we can't shut it down because we need a rink. So how do we evaluate that? Again, I don't want to get too in depth. Determining priority of replacements. and those dollar values and what percentage you're at. Again, from that inventory, how much of what needs to be replaced is mechanical versus electrical versus structural or enclosures. Some people have told me before, hey, yeah, how do we know how to manage this? Well, I said, if you've got, let's say, $1 million in fitness equipment and it all needs to be replaced, are you going to shut down the whole building? Well, or are you going to destroy it? Well, no, because the building's still intact. We'll just go out and buy new fitness equipment, and the vice versa. Let's say you have brand new fitness equipment, but the building's crumbling. Are you going to say, no, everything's okay? Well, no. So that's the value of collecting the data and structuring it, so you can actually see where those problem areas are and if it's going to affect the decision of how to proceed with the facility, or if it's just small fixtures and equipment inside that can be replaced. I'll leave that for now. So the process, how do we do this? How do we get to where we started at the very beginning to where we are now? First step, collect your inventory. So if you collect the inventory yourself, phenomenal, fantastic. If you get a company that does a master plan to do it for you, phenomenal. If you have a consultant or a industrial refrigeration company do it for you, phenomenal. If you reach out to the association, or if you need us to train you or show you or help you out, we do that as well. We've done it for a number of organizations. Again, not a sales pitch, but the point is that you need to collect the inventory. You need to start with that. Then you can run your risk assessments and do your inspections and your work orders, determine what needs to be replaced, run your scores, and then determine that priority. How long does something like this take? To collect your inventory isn't really that long of a process if you have the infrastructure in place, or if you have the grants or the funding available. Even at a high level, for an ice rink, for a single pad facility, you're looking at somewhere between 50 to 75 pieces of equipment to collect, which can be done in a matter of a few days if that time is set aside. If you have a twin pad, if you have 3 or 4 pads, that number doesn't grow that much because you still have maybe that one plant, maybe you have 2 plants. You just have probably an extra 10 to 15 pieces of equipment to collect per pad. Same idea if you've got a pool, if you've got a running track, if you've got a park. You don't need to go and do a full building condition assessment that'll cost you $75,000 and give you 500 pieces of equipment on the gypsum board and tables and photocopiers and so on. It's just about getting the ball rolling with those key pieces of equipment. I think we're getting near the end here. So what is unfunded liability? So let's say you need $150,000. That's what you went to council. They only give you $100,000. There's $50,000 left out, or 1/3 of that necessary investments won't be addressed. That results in a level of higher risk. So what we've got here is your operations and your asset management. So how does what we've shown you and all these operations tie together? Well, first off, you collect your inventory. From that, you do your inspections on that inventory. So I have a Zamboni, I have an ice resurfacer. I have to do my circle checks. I want to do my grease checks, 3 or 4 other checklists that are standard for me to go out and do. You fill all of those in. Then if there's some irregularity, you create a work order. Then that starts to cause some flags or some awareness on, hey, there's some risk associated, or there's some deterioration on this piece of equipment. Then you determine, is this high, medium, low risk? Do we need to budget X amount of dollars per year? What servicing is going to be involved? Is it have a 25-year lifespan? Then you budget all of those dollars accordingly. Once that piece of equipment is replaced, so all items have different lifespan, whether it's a year, like let's say filters or so on, all the way to a large mechanical piece of equipment like a dehumidification unit that might have 20 years, 25 years. It's still the same process. Then you replace it, you purchase, you install a new one, and you collect that inventory. And that process goes over and over and over again on all of your equipment. You folks are doing all of this already to a degree. The point is documenting it, collecting it, managing it, beyond just doing it in my head, doing it in a spreadsheet or on a piece of paper. Again, not a sales pitch, but to collect that data and take it to another level. We had an interesting example. Some people say, hey, okay, we're going to go out and spend tons and tons of money on software. We'll buy some tools. Software doesn't solve the problems or the issues. It only really magnifies what's going on in the organization. So what I mean by that, there's a quote from someone that we heard on one of these movies, and they did a 3D movie, and they said people put 3D effects in a movie to think it just automatically makes it better. It doesn't. 3D effects just magnify what it is. If it's a bad movie, it just makes it worse. You say, oh man, this is awful. If it's a great movie, it makes it look better. So if you purchase software and you think, wow, okay, it's going to streamline this, it's going to do that, and making inspections so much easier. If you don't do your inspections now, if you don't document, if there's no standard procedure in place, it's just going to show that you have 60 open inspections and 100 unfinished work orders, and you have 2 pieces of inventory collected. Now, on the flip side, if you collect all of your inventory and your staff always fill out their inspection forms and you're on top of your work orders, software and tools will just amplify and make it look so much better for all the work that you're doing. But just buying software won't change that fact. That being said, we have a whole bunch of other stuff that we could show you when it comes to ice management, when it comes to compressor logs, when it comes to tracking performance across the facilities. Again, we don't want to get too in depth. We appreciate you folks taking 45 minutes out of your busy schedule. Well, folks, that's it for me. I hope you folks found this quick overview, again, of 10 or 15 hours boiled into 45 minutes valuable. If you have any questions, feel free to add them in the chat or just unmute or raise a hand, and happy to answer. Otherwise, here's my information. Happy to schedule a follow-up chat to address any questions you may have and help you folks on that journey for asset management.